Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. June 5th is a date where history walks in carrying a battering ram, a balloon, a draft card, and a medical report. Then asks why everyone looks nervous. Today, we are looking at cracked walls, angry cities, vast mobilizations, and ordinary people facing machines much larger than themselves. Segment 1, and sacred places make terrible fortresses. On June 5th in the year 70, Jerusalem moved from doomed to officially doomed, which is a narrow distinction when you are standing near a Roman battering ram with a nickname. The city was starving, divided, and brutalized from within by rival factions who hated one another almost as much as they hated Rome. Simon ben Gioris, John of Gishgala, and Eleazar ben Simon were defending different pieces of the same city, which sounds like teamwork until you realize it was basically a holy site roommate situation where everyone had weapons and no one was doing dishes. General Titus surrounded Jerusalem with Roman engineering. Because Rome never met a wall it did not want to turn into rubble. After cracking the second wall, Titus rushed through the breach and got shoved back out through the narrow streets. For the defenders, that was a heroic tactical victory. For Rome, it was Tuesday with masonry. By June 5th, the Romans widened the breach and raised the northern section, pushing siege engines closer to the Temple Mount and sealing the city's fate. Centuries later, St. Boniface met a different kind of frontier violence in Phrygia. He had built monasteries, bishoprics, and the religious wiring that would help power Christian Europe. Then, at nearly 80, instead of retiring with sore knees and strong opinions, he went on one last mission. Raiders attacked his camp near Dockham, and tradition says he raised a holy book over his head as protection. It did not stop the blade, but it left us with the strange image of medieval Europe being built by a man trying to block an axe with theology. Sacred places and sacred texts can shape civilizations, but they make terrible helmets. Segment 2, and cities hate being told what to do. If segment 1 was about walls falling, segment 2 is about cities deciding the wall was never the real problem. In 1288, the Battle of Warringen erupted from the kind of inheritance dispute that makes medieval Europe feel less like a continent and more like a family group chat with horses. The Duchy of Limburg had no male heir. Nobles started claiming it, and John I, Duke of Brabant, saw a chance to control a trade route linking textile cities to the Rhine. That made Siegfried II of Westerburg, the Archbishop of Cologne, deeply unhappy. Because if there is one thing medieval religious leaders loved more than heaven, it was toll revenue. The citizens of Cologne, tired of their own archbishop, sided against him. Armies collided. Cologne's ruler was humiliated. Brabant gained Limburg, and Dusseldorf got city rights, proving urban development sometimes begins with armored men settling a zoning dispute with axes. Fast forward to Paris in 1832, where the July Revolution had promised a new dawn, then delivered King Louis Philippe, the budget-friendly constitutional version of the monarch they had just overthrown. Economic misery, cholera, and betrayal filled the streets, and the funeral of General Jean-Maximilien Lamarck became the spark. Students, workers, radicals, and refugees turned mourning into rebellion, building barricades across Paris. The uprising failed, crushed by overwhelming troops, but it gave Victor Hugo the raw material for Les Miserables, after he wandered into gunfire like a man whose GPS was set to literary trauma. Warringen and Paris show the same pattern. Cities are pressure cookers with cobblestones, taxes, funeral processions, and a long memory for anyone who mistakes the public for furniture. Segment 3, and the future arrives wearing a paper hat. June 5th also enjoys showing humanity the future before humanity has read the warning label. In 1783, Joseph and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier demonstrated a successful hot air balloon flight in Annonay, France. They had noticed paper scraps rising in smoke and concluded that smoke itself had mysterious lifting power. They were wrong about the science, but right enough to start aviation, which is the Enlightenment in one sentence. Confident, incorrect, and somehow airborne. Their unmanned balloon rose above the crowd, drifted across the countryside, and terrified people who saw a giant smoking orb descending from the sky and thought, well, that cannot be good. Later tests sent up a sheep, a duck, and a rooster, making the first flight program less NASA and more barnyard escape room. The rooster survived with a wing injury, not from altitude, but because the sheep kicked it, proving even early aerospace had workplace incidents. Then, in 1917, the United States discovered another future: modern mass mobilization. Army Registration Day required millions of men to register for the World War I draft. The country had just re-elected Woodrow Wilson on the idea that he kept America out of war, then quickly pivoted to, please fill out this card so Europe can ruin your afternoon. Nearly 10 million men registered in one day, helping build the American Expeditionary Forces and announcing the United States as a military superpower. The balloon and the draft card seem unrelated, but both reveal the same truth. Modern history is built when humans figure out how to scale an idea. Progress, it turns out, is a balloon basket with a clipboard. Segment 4, and the hour before the world changes. Sometimes June 5th is not the explosion itself. It is the inhale before history kicks open the door. In 1944, Allied troops entered Rome after months of brutal fighting up the Italian peninsula. Rome became the first Axis capital to fall, with American tanks rolling past the Colosseum while Romans cheered in the streets. Franklin Roosevelt announced the victory with the line, "One up and two to go," which is a clean wartime slogan, though not as emotionally honest as, please keep buying bonds because this is not over. But even as Rome celebrated, another operation was being decided across the channel. General Dwight D. Eisenhower faced terrible weather, nervous commanders, and the weight of launching the largest seaborne invasion in history. On June 5th, he gave the order to launch D-Day the next morning. So while one ancient capital was being liberated, ships full of soldiers were pitching in the storm, waiting for Normandy. In 1967, another morning changed a region in hours. Israel, facing Egypt's blockade of the Straits of Tiran and hostile armies nearby, launched Operation Focus. Israeli pilots flew low to avoid radar and struck Egyptian airfields with devastating surprise. By noon, hundreds of Arab aircraft had been destroyed, giving Israel air supremacy and setting the course for the Six-Day War. One dark irony was that Egypt's high command had issued a no-fire order to protect its own leader's plane, effectively telling air defenses to take a personal day at the exact moment they were needed. Wars often turn on decisions made before most people know the day has begun. A weather forecast, a runway, or a commander staring at a map and realizing the easy option disappeared 3 weeks ago. Segment 5, and the individual versus the machine. The modern June 5th ledger is filled with machines. Political machines, military machines, medical bureaucracies, and literal tanks. In 1968, Robert F. Kennedy had just won the California Democratic primary, giving his campaign momentum in a year already broken by Vietnam, unrest, and the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Minutes after midnight at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, Kennedy walked through a kitchen pantry and was shot by Sirhan Sirhan. He died the next day, leaving behind a pregnant wife, 11 children, and a country that seemed to be losing its future one public funeral at a time. In 1981, another crisis entered public view quietly through a CDC report about 5 young men in Los Angeles with rare pneumonia and collapsing immune systems. That 9-paragraph notice became the first official description of AIDS. It was small, clinical, and terrifying. The sort of document that does not sound like thunder until you realize the storm has already reached every city. Then, in 1989, one unidentified man in Beijing stood before tanks near Tiananmen Square, carrying shopping bags like he had stepped out for groceries and accidentally met the 20th century. The tank tried to move around him, and he moved with it. For a few minutes, one ordinary body interrupted the choreography of authoritarian power. These are not the same story, but they share a painful truth. Institutions often move like machines, and human beings are usually told to get out of the way. Sometimes they cannot. Sometimes they will not. And sometimes the world only understands the size of the machine because one person stands close enough to show the scale. In conclusion, June 5th rarely arrives in a clean costume. It comes as a cracked wall, a funeral crowd, a floating balloon, a draft card, a storm forecast, a runway strike, a medical bulletin, and one man with shopping bags facing a tank. Power keeps building bigger systems to control the future, and humanity keeps answering with barricades, bad calculations, stubborn courage, and the occasional sheep in an aircraft.